All right, everyone. We are at part two right now, picking up from the Seder Square and the Nolan Square. And assuming you watched part one, if I had done my job correctly, you should be at a place right now where the relationship between the name Nolan and how the Seder Square works, that should be evident right now. And we're not necessarily at any sort of conclusion as to why it exists, but we note that it does exist. So from there, we're going to continue to move forward. And we're going to do the Nolan-Kubrick pivot. And so from a mainstream Hollywood perspective, just looking at movies like they're movies, and Hollywood is just an industry, and all of this is business as usual. Like, it's totally normal for 8 billion people to be living on a rock in Earth and have agreed upon to come up with a system of control based upon financial systems and owing trillions of dollars of debt to, whom? Like, just the craziness. We're going to move forward at the perspective that all of that is what you see is what you get. Okay? We're going to go deeper than that eventually, but we're going to move forward from that perspective. And from that perspective, Christopher Nolan is thought of as the next generation, or the next generation's version of the filmmaker Stanley Kubrick. The comparison of Nolan to Kubrick is common in film circles, highlighting shared traits like ambitious, genre-bending films, intellectual themes, studio independence, and a distinctive detail-oriented style. All right. So this here is each of their filmographies. I picked up Kubrick's from his movie Dr. Strangelove, which came out in '64, and then his final movie that was released was Eyes Wide Shut in 1999. And in that time period, you could see there was 7 films. And then we look at Nolan's filmography, which really begins in earnest at the year 2000 with the film Memento. Listed here is another film called Following, but that was not really a Hollywood film. Memento was his first Hollywood film, if you will. And we're just looking at the timeline, this overlap of where Nolan picked up the baton from where Kubrick put it down. So the timeline that we're given is that March 99 is when Kubrick died, and then in July 99, Eyes Wide Shut was released, supposedly re-edited to change the purpose or the storyline of the film. And then a handful of months later, in September 1999, Nolan begins filming his first Hollywood film, Memento. You can see right here, this is talking about Memento. And then in September of 2000, 1 year afterwards, Memento is released. And since we're looking at timelines, we're also going to look at this one. And we're just going to sit with this for a moment. And we're looking at this relationship between the release date of 2001 Space Odyssey, which was in April '68, and then the Apollo moon landing, which happened in July of '69. And the reason I'm putting those together is because what's common in the posthumous, is that how I pronounce it? Like, since Kubrick died, the stories associated with him is that when he filmed 2001 Space Odyssey, it was actually it provided cover for him to make the fake moon landing, film that. And, I don't know if this is the case. I'm just saying it'll be funny because it's a funny world we live in, right? But Memento has a similar type of relationship in terms of timing with its release and the events of 9/11. which, 2001. And wouldn't it be funny that 33 years after the events of 9/11, it is said that Christopher Nolan faked or created the images that were projected on everyone's screen in 2001. I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm just saying it'll be funny if it happened. But anyway, let's continue to move forward, because we're going to go somewhere with this. We're going to go someplace really, really kind of tangible, but we're laying out the foundation in which we're going to build upon. So let's also throw this out there. Currently, at the time of this recording, which is December of 2025, there's a lot of hype within the world of Christopher Nolan films that his next film is called The Odyssey, and it's going to be released next summer. So, the word Odyssey obviously plays into 2001 Space Odyssey, but it is a different application of the word Odyssey here, because it's implying, or it connects to the poem associated to, I think he's Greek, Homer. Like Homer's The Odyssey, like that's what this is about. And so, whether it's a different play on the word Odyssey, regardless if it's, like a retelling of the 2001 Space Odyssey film, there is a connection there. And, it's not direct, but there is a certain link between the words memento and Odyssey. Remember, we're starting here with memento. Just in the fact that a memento is often, it's interchangeable with the word souvenir, and they typically are an object or a reminder of a person or an event. And an odyssey is a long, eventful journey or experience, like an event. So they kind of link. Just throwing that out there right now. So let's go to here. This one here just cracked me up. So this is from the Wiki Hickey history, and this is Christopher Nolan's page, and it says his uncle. So Nolan's uncle, he worked at NASA. Of course he did, right? And not only that, his uncle, when he worked at NASA, he was involved with the building of the guidance systems for the Apollo rockets. And he sent young Christopher Nolan footage, like NASA behind the scene footage, and then Nolan, as a young boy, refilmed them off the screen, cut them, thinking no one would notice. What the hell is this, right? So, just so we know what we're talking about, this in the wiki description, it makes reference to this Apollo rocket's guidance system. And in the history of the Apollo missions, this Apollo guidance computer was kind of like a big deal. It was a digital computer produced for the Apollo program that was installed on board each Apollo command module and Apollo lunar module. So let's continue to go with that. This here is a famous picture of Stanley Kubrick on the set of 2001 Space Odyssey. And, this is often used, or it's been used frequently as a some degree of proof or demonstration of 2001 Space Odyssey being the cover of the filming of fake moon landing. And in this picture, we've got a couple different characters. That's Kubrick. That's the pedophile author, Arthur C. Clarke. NASA astronaut Deke Slayton. Never heard of him before. And then this advisor, Frederick Orway. Looks like a Hollywood movie star compared to these guys. Kind of similar to how Jack Parsons looks like a movie star compared to, NASA rocket folks. And then we also have this senior administrator from the Apollo project, George Muller. So let's look into these guys. We've got Frederick Orde, and he advised Stanley Kubrick on authentic space tech, including the logic behind the complex guidance, while the actual Apollo guidance computer system was MIT's creation. Ordway was a science writer and expert who ensured technical accuracy in the movie, bridging the gap between real space engineering and sci-fi visuals, even as the real AGC ran the spacecraft. So now we've got like an AGC connection, right? And then this guy also, George Muller, was involved with the AGC program. This is just from another article I found. So that was the first time that a top person at NASA said, "What's going on with the Apollo computer?" Batten said. Well, then all of a sudden, now the floodlights are on us, and George Muller came up to Boston to visit, and then he was sending people up from headquarters. He found out that we had this funny computer, that's the AGC, and funny programming system. All of a sudden, the interest in Apollo software became paramount. So George Muller was the guy who was the connection between the folks at NASA and the Apollo guidance software, who is working with Stanley Kubrick, and then, you know, Christopher Nolan also has a connection to this AGC because his uncle, who's not named, you know, I checked this out in a couple places. The story of Nolan's NASA uncle is mentioned many times, but at no point is his name given. You know, whether his uncle is George Muller or Frederick Orde, I don't know. But, you know, again, we're seeing more and more of these kind of connections. But the fulcrum, the most undeniable, the least amount of implication and assumption between the connection of Kubrick and Nolan is in the similarity in film images between 2001: Space Odyssey and Christopher Nolan's Interstellar. Here are some side-by-side images of, you know, something I saw on Reddit where you could see, I think that's 2001: Space Odyssey, that is Interstellar, 2001: Space Odyssey, 2001: Space Odyssey, Interstellar, Odyssey, Interstellar. So then I assume that's Interstellar and that's Odyssey. But it is quite evident that for whatever reason, the most obvious reason being just like a tip of the hat, a wink and a nod from Christopher Nolan at the cinematic style of 2001: Space Odyssey. There's, you know, that would be the simplest explanation as to why this exists, but regardless, it exists. Here we can go and see the two different movie posters of 2001: Space Odyssey and Interstellar. And so this Interstellar is the only film in Nolan's filmography about outer space, just as 2001: Space Odyssey was the only film in Kubrick's filmography about outer space. So this is kind of where they both praise the heavens, if you will, making reference back to this Nolan cube. So to better understand Nolan, you know, we look at Kubrick. And one of the things which we see about Kubrick is the fact that he is a chess master. He's a gamesman. Or at least that is tied into the lore around Stanley Kubrick. And if you recall, in part one, we really went in deep into the Sator Square, and we decoded it. We decoded its structure, because the Seder square is a sort of word play, letter play, unorthodox sort of game or puzzle with palindromes, reverse grams, and acronyms. And so if we could think of wordplay as just a modus operandi, like the overall umbrella of the term wordplay, that's a thing. And we could even go a little bit further into, just the nature of the mystery of this realm. Like, if you follow the Bible begins. In the beginning there was the Word. And we know, like, from a magic, witchy perspective, there's spells and spelling and grammar and grimoire. And so there's a seemingly implied connection between words themselves, or maybe phonetics and sounds, and the makeup of this mysterious realm which we're experienced together. And there's wordplay involved with Kubrick as well. And like the Seder Square, which doesn't really fit into a specific wordplay model, the same is true with Kubrick. And I'm certain this has been said probably countless of times, but the word Kubrick it hints at Rubik's Cube. And that's kind of self-evident when you hear it. I spent a little bit of time just like breaking it down to like how you go from Kubrick to Rubik, but you can see it. You take the first syllable of cube and you put it on the back end, and then the K's missing, and you put the R there, and it goes from cubic to Rubik's Cube. And this idea of a cube, if you will, really plays into the same concept of a Seder square in a way. Obviously, the Rubik's Cube does not have letters involved with it, but in its naming, there is a certain sort of subtle connection to the name of Kubrick. But when we look a little bit deeper than just saying like, oh, well, they sound alike, and certain things are going to sound alike, it's more than just the wordplay or letter play phonetics, because what the Rubik's Cube is, it's a puzzle. It's not just a puzzle. It is the best-selling puzzle game and best-selling toy in history. And so to have a puzzle connected to arguably the greatest and most influential director at the time, both the Rubik's Cube and Kubrick as a director who is a gamesman, there's a complementary connection between those two. And, just the timing of it just kind of lines up as well. Rubik's Cube was first released in the United States on May 1st, 1980, to coincide in multiple toy fairs in London, New York, and Paris. And then also in May 1980, not on the same day, is when Kubrick's The Shining was released. Just pointing out all of the different things. We're not necessarily stating that any one of these is a huge smoking gun pointing to something else. But what we are doing is looking at a collection of data points. And with each new data point which presents itself, the probability of there being a there only increases. So what do? We looked at like this connection of the timing between Kubrick and Nolan. we looked at this connection between the guidance system, NASA, and Nolan and Kubrick, and we looked at the connection between Space Odyssey and Interstellar, and we looked at the wordplay between Kubrick and the Seder Square. And so we've got like we've got a whole bunch of data right now, and we can put that in context also with what is kind of thought of as at least the alternative understanding of Stanley Kubrick. It is thought that his filmography is part of a greater master revelation done by this gamesman, where 2001 Space Odyssey was the cover of the moon landing, and The Shining was an encoded movie explaining how the moon launch was faked. And then The Clockwork Orange is a MK Ultra-like hypnosis of what was done to the astronauts. And then Eyes Wide Shut was ultimately a revelation of elite pedophilia rings. And so that is kind of accepted as a truth in the alt narrative world right now. But, you don't know for certain if that's true. It's certainly it's a very, very compelling story. It makes sense to me, but I also recognize that, maybe there's more to the equation. Maybe these aren't accurate interpretations. But even if they were, that then asks another question, was Stanley Kubrick just a character in the play, in the movie, which is presented to all of humanity, or was he an actual outsider who had inside privileges and he spilled the beans? You don't know. And then also, if we are looking at Stanley Kubrick from this perspective, what does that imply about Christopher Nolan? Where we can see there is a continuity in terms of both the content which they produce and then their general role as directors in Hollywood during certain genres. So all of that is I want to state that. I want to state and be clear that there's maybe this means it, maybe it doesn't. It's certainly interesting. But this is where I'm going with it. Because whereas all the stuff I just laid out for you is arguably debatable. It is subjective to a certain extent. There are holes in the story which require some degree of assumption. We've got something even stranger. The strangest thing, in my opinion, which is completely unopen for interpretation, because it's as clear as can be. And what is that? It's that within the context of the film 2001 Space Odyssey, the mysterious monolith shows up at epic transitions in the history of human evolution, and on the events of September 11th, in the year of 2001, the year 33 years later from the release of the movie, there was an epic transition in human evolution. And the archetype of the monolith literally shows up in the background in the form of the Millennium Hilton Hotel, mirroring the same images that you see in the movie. There is absolutely no denying that this happened. This connection exists, and very much like this Nolan mental cube, it exists at the peripheral of reality. And what I mean by that is it is a undebatable thing that actually happened, but it doesn't make sense And so it's easiest for the mainstream mind to just kind of write it off. So let me go and show you. So the monolith. The monolith in the movie 2001 Space Odyssey seems to represent and even trigger epic transitions in the history of human evolution. Evolution of humans from ape-like beings to civilized people, hence the Odyssey of humankind. So here's a shot from the beginning of 2001 Space Odyssey where it's got the monkeys, and here's one of the many times which the monolith shows up. And this here is a picture of what they call Ground Zero, where the World Trade Centers, after they've been cleared out, there's a big hole in the ground, and then right across the street is the Millennium Hilton Hotel, which looks in color and proportion almost identical to the monolith. This really happened. These are actual images that have, supposedly come from the footage from the collapse of the towers. I mean, I look at this right now, it almost looks like this tower, or the Millennium Hilton, is photoshopped in front of the World Trade Center. That's what it appears. I'm not saying that's what it was. I'm just saying that's what it looks like. But this happened. This literally happened. And so now we are left with an undeniable connection between Kubrick and with Nolan. And we're left with movies, and we're left with all sorts of things that don't quite make sense, but at the same time they do. So what do we do with this insight? We watch Inception, the Christopher Nolan film. The Christopher Nolan film about dreams within dreams within dreams, where it is very, very unclear to the dreamer and the viewer of the film what exactly is happening. Sound familiar? So this is how this Inception viewing project is being set up. Imagine, if you will, you are dreaming right now. You've always been dreaming, and all that you thought was your waking life was and is a dream. Just pretend that is what is happening. Now, imagine in this dream, the movie Inception provides instructions and a map of the layout of this dream you are having. When you watch Inception, pretend you are that dreamer. And when you watch Inception, you are not viewing it to be entertained, but to be elucidated and educated. So if it's been a while since you've watched Inception, a couple things that are worthy of pointing out is that Inception deals with a concept called shared dreaming, which occurs naturally, but there's also a military-grade version of it. There are techniques which it is possible to frame another's dream within something that's artificial to create a false dream setting, and then from that setting, implant ideas in the dreamer's mind. In the movie, while dreaming, the experience is created and perceived simultaneously, and this is unknown to the dreamer. There are dreams within dreams, and the deeper the dreamer goes, more of the brain is used and time slows down. And when the false dream architecture collapses in Inception, it causes no damage to the dreamer. These are all parts of the Inception story. So, what if we play along with it? What if we pay attention to all of the clues that are presented in front of us about the mysteries of Nolan and Kubrick and dreams and secret messages hiding right before you in movies. And we take it literally. We take it seriously, but we have fun with it, and we're playful with it. So that's what we're going to do. And so just pointing out a couple more images. These are some pictures from Inception. We could see right here, here's a part from Inception where the character draws a maze, because mazes are are a big part of creating the false dream architecture. And here we see is this picture of Kubrick with Jack Nicholson during the filming of The Shining. And here we see the maze. And here we see scenes from the movie Inception of whenever the false dreams within Inception begin to come to an end, the setting collapses in this very grandiose way, but nothing ever happens to the characters, which, if you think about the events of 9/11, yes, we're told 2,000 people died in the towers on that day, but when those towers collapsed, they didn't destroy the rest of Manhattan. And there's a certain similarity, if you will, to the way the collapse happens in Inception. And then also when we look at some of the images from Inception of the collapse of the dream world, we can see that there are certain visual similarities to the events of 9/11. Here's another comparison of images from Inception right down here. This is a bedroom scene, and this is from 2001 Space Odyssey. And you can see how they are very similar, yet in versions of one another. And so I'm inviting anyone who is interested in leaning into this one step further and joining me in the Inception project, where you will watch the movie independently on your own, and you'll watch it and take notes. I will provide a list of guideline questions, not necessarily to be asked or to be answered, but for you to think about certain things, certain details to bring into your awareness. And then you watch the film. And then we will have a group call which will present an opportunity for each person to share really whatever they want to, whether it's answering specifically some of the questions I put forth or something else. But the point is not to present what they think Inception is about, as much as it is to share their insights with an audience and the witness. For part of this realm and part of the consciousness experience is the role of the witness. For the observer does change the outcome of the experiment. And then you'll watch it again and follow up with a second call. I've got a couple spots that are left. If you are interested, send me an email. Let's get you signed up. It's $99. You could send me the $99 directly to via the addresses which I have in the notes. If I get more than 6, I'll do this a couple times. But this, to me, is both a very fun, tangible, and original way to begin to take these concepts which are laid out in front of us in this mystery. As the mystery seems to be collapsing before us and the next version of the dream is being laid out, what happens if you approach your life and your reality with the rules, laws, and maps which are laid out for you by the architects of the contemporary dream? So, all right, friends, if you're interested, reach out to me. Also, the Grounding Consciousness course. all of this is connected. It's all the same thing. And what it is the process of becoming lucid in the dream and disentangled from the matrix. And this is a process that begins in consciousness. If my work speaks to you, then this next level is going to speak to you as well. Reach out to me, and we'll keep on moving forward.